Imagine waking before dawn to the sound of church bells that refuse to fall silent. Not a feast day, not a wedding. Another death, then another. Until the ringing becomes part of the air itself. You step outside expecting an ordinary morning. But something feels different. The streets are quieter than yesterday. The baker, who always opens before sunrise, has not unlocked his door. A neighbor avoids your eyes, as if even a glance could carry danger. You have no knowledge of bacteria or viruses. You have never heard the word pandemic. The only explanations offered are whispered prayers, terrifying rumors, and warnings that God's judgment has come upon the earth. Every cough turns heads. Every goodbye might be the last one spoken. Somewhere beyond the horizon, merchants are arriving from distant ports carrying goods that promise prosperity. Hidden among those goods is something no one can see, something that will erase entire families, empty villages, and change the course of history forever. There are no hospitals prepared for this, no antibiotics, no agreement even among the wisest physicians about what is happening. Some blame poisoned air. Others point to the stars. Many believe it is divine punishment. While scholars debate, the sickness keeps moving from house to house. This is the story of ordinary people who believed tomorrow would look like yesterday until their entire world disappeared in a matter of weeks. Because before this journey is over, you may find yourself asking a question no history book can answer with certainty. If you had been there, would you have survived? Spring 1348. Life still follows its old rhythm. Farmers in the fields, merchants in the marketplace, children playing near the churchyard. Predictable, safe. Then the rumors arrive. Travelers speak of strange deaths in distant cities, entire households vanishing within days. Ships reaching port with far fewer sailors than had departed, some drifting into harbor with no living crew at all. At first the stories sound impossible, the kind that grows larger with every retelling around a fire. But each week they come from somewhere closer. A village beyond the hills has closed its gates. A monastery has buried several monks in a single week. A household that hosted a wedding days ago is suddenly silent. Nobody can explain why. Without newspapers or reliable roads connecting distant towns. News travels only as fast as a horse, filtered through frightened witnesses, half-truth folded into imagination. People don't know what to believe, but they know enough to be afraid. The marketplace looks thinner each morning. Doors that once stood open now stay closed. Invitations disappear. Celebrations are quietly cancelled. And the church bells ring more often. At first, no one counts the funerals. Death is already part of medieval life. But priests begin to notice. The dead had looked healthy only days before. Still, most people convince themselves this will pass, the way it always has. They keep planting crops, keep baking bread, keep making plans for a harvest they cannot know they'll never bring in. The true horror of the Black Death didn't begin when people started dying. It began the moment ordinary life stopped feeling ordinary, and no one could say why. It begins with someone you know. Not a stranger in a distant city, the baker who greeted you every morning, the neighbor who helped repair your roof, yesterday healthy, today they cannot rise from bed. At first no one fears the worst. A fever isn't unusual. The family gathers. Water, herbs, prayer. The local healer is called. Everything follows the customs generations have trusted. Then the illness changes. the fever climbs with frightening speed. Pain spreads until even the smallest movement is unbearable. Beneath the skin, swollen lumps rise in the neck, the armpits, the groin, what we now call buboes. Breathing turns labored. A person speaking clearly at sunrise may not recognize their own family by nightfall, and in the room something else begins to happen. Fear replaces comfort. A wife hesitates before taking her husband's hand. Parents stall at the door of a feverish child's room. These are not acts of cruelty. They are desperate, blind attempts to survive something no one can see coming. Physicians try everything they know, redding the color of urine, bleeding the patient, balancing the body's humors according to teachings inherited from Galen and Avicenna. They are not fools. They are simply fighting an enemy medicine has not yet learned to name, and losing. Outside, the street empties a little more. Neighbors cross to the far side of the road. Every flushed forehead draws a glance. Then the bells ring again. Another funeral. Another family shattered. And a single, terrifying thought begins to move through every village in Europe. If the strongest among us can fall in a few days, what chance does anyone else have? Survival, it turns out, has nothing to do with courage. It comes down to choices made before anyone understands why they matter. Flee or stay. Open country feels safer than crowded streets, and sometimes it is. But those who flee sometimes carry the disease with them, seeding it in villages that had, until then, been spared. The wealthy flee to their estates. Florentine nobles, as the writer Boccaccio described, abandoned the city for the isolation of the countryside, buying themselves distance while Florence descended into chaos. The peasant cannot flee at all. His field, his animals, his home, that is his entire life. Leaving means starvation. Staying means the plague. There is no safe option, only a choice between two different kinds of fear. The priest stays. Thousands of clergy remained at the bedsides of the dying, hearing final confessions, refusing to abandon their people, and dying alongside them. Other monasteries closed their gates entirely, sealing themselves off from the world. Sometimes that isolation saved them. Sometimes the disease was already inside, and there was nowhere left to run. And through it all, luck decided more than anyone wanted to admit. Two families on the same street, making nearly identical choices. One survives, the other is erased. A merchant delayed by bad weather never enters the infected city he was riding toward. Wealth, faith, and wisdom offered no guarantee. The line between life and death could be as thin as being in the wrong place on the wrong day. The silence arrives gradually. One morning the blacksmith's hammer doesn't sound. The mill wheel stands still. No one has come to grind grain. A week later, there is no laughter in the street. The marketplace empties. Caravans stop arriving, or arrive missing half their men. Fields wait to be harvested, but there aren't enough hands left to bring in the crop. Livestock wander untended. Vineyards surrender to weeds. The countryside doesn't stop growing. It simply continues without the people who once shaped it. Even the churches change. Priests who once knew every family by name can no longer keep pace with the funerals. Individual graves become impossible. Communal pits take their place, where strangers lie beside each other by the hundred. Weddings are postponed. Festivals cancelled. Windows stay shuttered long past sunrise. Smoke stops rising from chimneys because there is no one left inside to light the fire. Dogs wander without owners. Chickens scratch through deserted farmyards. People stop planning for next year's harvest and start asking a smaller, sharper question every single morning. Who will still be alive by nightfall? Fear doesn't announce itself. It slips quietly into daily life until people find themselves making choices they never imagined they were capable of. Some abandon everything. Chroniclers describe families fleeing their own homes at the first sign of illness. Healthy relatives leaving food outside the door rather than stepping inside. Servants disappearing before dawn. Not always out of selfishness. Often it is the only way they know to protect what's left of their family. Others choose the opposite. Priests keep hearing confessions. Nuns take in children whose parents will never return. Physicians walk into homes everyone else avoids, armed with nothing but experience and remedies. History will later prove useless, and they do it anyway. And fear, unable to explain the disaster, searches for someone to blame. In many parts of Europe, that suspicion turned into horrific violence against Jewish communities. Falsely accused of poisoning wells, communities that were in truth suffering the plague just as deeply as everyone else. History remembers this as one of fear's darkest legacies, but alongside it, parents who never leave a dying child's side. Neighbors who quietly bury the dead when no family remains. Monks who keep copying books, preserving knowledge while the world outside falls apart. Disaster does not create character. It exposes it. If you lived through the Black Death, every sunrise carried the same desperate question: what can I do today that might keep me alive tomorrow? No one had the real answer, so belief became a form of survival. Many physicians blamed miasma, corrupted air carrying the disease on its scent. People carried bundles of rosemary, sage, and lavender beneath their noses. Fires burned in public squares, not for warmth, but because smoke was thought to purify the air. Some doctors wore long-beaked masks stuffed with herbs, though that image, so tied to the plague in our minds today, belongs mostly to later outbreaks, not to 1348 itself. Astrologers searched the sky, certain the alignment of the planets had unbalanced the earth. Processions filled the streets in prayer. Groups called the Flagellants whipped themselves publicly through town after town, believing suffering could atone for humanity's sins and turn back God's anger. And in the middle of all this desperation, one idea quietly changed the future. Certain port cities, Venice among them, began holding incoming ships offshore before allowing anyone to disembark. 40 days of isolation. In Italian, 40 giorni. The word we still use today, quarantine. No one understood germs, but experience had taught them that separation, sometimes, was enough. The morning finally comes when the bells ring less. Not because there is less death to mourn, because there are simply fewer people left to bury. If you survived, relief does not arrive as celebration. It arrives as disbelief. The road into your village is quieter than you remember. Doors hang open, gardens have gone wild. You begin counting the faces that are missing, one by one, until entire family lines have vanished. And yet the fields still need planting. The animals still need feeding. Something else becomes impossible to ignore. There is no one left to do the work. Across Europe, labor has become scarce almost overnight. Landowners who once commanded armies of peasants can't find anyone to work their fields. Skilled craftsmen, builders, masons, millers, suddenly find their labor worth more than ever before. Workers start asking for higher wages. Some simply leave one lord's land for another, offering better terms. Governments panic. In England, the Statute of Labourers of 1351 tries to freeze wages at pre-plague levels by law. It fails. You cannot legislate people back into existence. The shortage is real, and it keeps reshaping society no matter how hard the old order tries to hold on. Women take on roles once reserved almost entirely for men, managing farms, workshops, and property left behind. The Church, having lost thousands of clergy, struggles to rebuild, and for the first time questions about faith and authority that once seemed unthinkable begin to surface. The plague took millions of lives, but it also rewrote the rules by which the living would build what came next. Europe never went back to the world it had been. The rigid feudal order, where peasants had no leverage and landowners held all the power, cracked because there weren't enough people left to sustain it. Wages rose. Opportunity, for the first time in generations, reached families who had expected to remain poor for life. The failure of old medical teaching planted the first seeds of a more careful, evidence-based approach to disease. Port cities refined the practice of quarantine into something closer to real public health policy. Artists filled churches with images of skeletons and seer glasses, the dance of death, a society that had looked mortality directly in the eye and could no longer look away. Grandparents told grandchildren stories of villages that had disappeared in months. The memory became part of Europe's collective inheritance, a warning passed from one generation to the next. The people who lived through 1348 never thought of themselves as changing history. They believed they were simply trying to feed their families and survive one more winter. They didn't know they were standing between two worlds. They believed they were watching civilization collapse. In truth, they were witnessing the birth of a new one. More than 6 centuries later, their story still speaks to us, not because we can fully imagine their suffering, but because we recognize something timeless inside it. The fear of the unknown, the hope that tomorrow will be better than today, and the strength to keep moving even after unbearable loss. So, if you had lived in the year 1348, would you have survived?